Hello again, or just hello if you've never seen this before. This is episode 8 of this series I'm doing. I was in negotiations with Netflix to develop this into a series, but talks broke off. We couldn't see eye to eye on so many things, so that's why I went with YouTube. So this is episode 8 of this little silly series that I'm doing. This started about a month and a half ago. It's kind of boring. There's not a lot of things to do because everything is closed. I don't know where you live, but where I live, we can go outside, but everything is closed, so there's nothing to do. So one of the things that I like to do is listen to music, but then talk about music too. So I'm going through bands' discographies. This is, as I said, episode 8. I had Motorhead, Kiss, Slayer, Anthrax, Faith No More, Pearl Jam, and Iron Maiden. Today I'm going to do Metallica. Now I've mentioned before some of what I consider those are my really favorite bands. Metallica might be number 1. Maybe Kiss or Metallica. Not that any of this matters, but I got into Kiss first. I was only 6 years old when I got into Kiss in 1975, and I still love Kiss. But I got into Metallica. I'll talk about that a little bit later. In 1983, Metallica is one of the bands in this series that I'm doing that I have been into right from the very beginning. It's Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. I was into all 3 of those bands right from the start, right from their first album, which maybe makes a little bit of a difference. And at some point, I would say Metallica became a bigger band in my life than Kiss was. You know, at a time when Kiss was putting out, I guess, Animalize, Asylum, Hot in the Shade, and Crazy Nights. Metallica was putting out Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. So Metallica has been in my life for a long, long time and always been there. So maybe Metallica is, I would say, my favorite band ever. I've got a few Metallica posters, gig posters back here from times I've seen them. So I'm going to get to it. I'm going to talk about my introduction to Metallica. As I said, I was into them right from the start. I can't go back as far as the demo. I can't. No Life to Leather. I wasn't a fan then, but I was a fan of Kill 'Em All. Kill 'Em All came out at early '83, summer of '83. I don't know, sometime in '83. I got into them maybe in the summer or fall or something like that. I've mentioned this with Anthrax and Slayer, that I used to listen to a lot of metal radio. They had these late night metal shows, and I used to listen to those, and I recorded. If I remember correctly, I had Hit the Lights, and they played Hit the Lights, and then I know I had also Seek and Destroy and the Four Horsemen. I think maybe on the same tape. It was maybe with, I can't remember who else was on that. Maybe they were playing Raven at the time or something like that. But those were the first 3 Metallica songs that I heard: Hit the Lights, Four Horsemen, and Seek and Destroy. And I loved them. Even back then, I was listening to almost everything was new for me, and I loved it all. Even back then, there was something about Metallica that I really, really loved. I loved them more than Slayer, more than Anthrax. Those are the new bands that were, the new wave of metal at the time. Not new wave of British heavy metal, but the thrash metal. And I liked Raven and Anthrax and Slayer, especially Anthrax and Slayer. But Metallica was always, for me, better than any of those bands. So I bought Kill 'Em All. I remember it very well. It was in December '83, maybe at some time before Christmas, because I lived in Toronto, and I was going downtown Toronto. I lived in Scarborough, and I was going downtown Toronto with my friend Daniel McClellan, and I think we were going to do Christmas shopping or buy whatever you buy when you're 14 years old for Christmas. And I found $10 on the subway, and I took that $10 and I bought Kill 'Em All. I think I bought it at Records on Wheels, which was a great record store on Yonge Street. Not sure about that, but I think. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about that, Kill 'Em All. So the first Metallica album, Kill 'Em All, this came out, as I said, in '83. So some people would say this is of the big 4, the debut albums of the big 4 of thrash, which was Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth. some would say, some would say any one of the four is the best. This is my favorite. Kill 'Em All is my favorite. If you're interested, I think for sure, Show No Mercy was number 2, Slayer. Fistful of Metal 3, Megadeth. Killing Is My Business, number 4. This was head and shoulders above those other 3, and just above everything I was listening to at the time. This is, it's a classic album. You could see they still had some rough spots. For example, Metal Militia. Now again, when I was 14 years old and I heard this song, at that time it was probably the fastest song I'd ever heard. And they were singing about metal, man. And when you're 14 years old and the lyrics are all about metal and and Whiplash was like that too. But bang your head against the stage like you never did before. Make it ring, make it bleed, make it really sore. Hit the lights, no life to leather. We're gonna kick some ass tonight. This was just incredible. When you're 14 years old, hearing this stuff for the first time was incredible. They were singing about the kind of music they were playing, which I don't know if bands were doing that before. Maybe not. I don't think the bands I was listening to. But I loved this album at the time, and I still do. Probably my favorite on this one is Four Horsemen. At the time, I liked Seek and Destroy better than the other two, better than Hit the Lights and Four Horsemen. But as the years go by, for different reasons, you gravitate towards other songs, and other ones you maybe realize they weren't as good as you thought they were. I don't like Metal Militia as much as I did when I was 14. I'm 50 years old, and it's still a fun, cool song to hear, but it's not really a good representation of what Metallica came to be, much to the chagrin of people later on. Motor Breath, Jump in the Fire, Pulling Teeth. I'll say, maybe I've said this before about I think all the bands I talked about before. I'm not a huge fan of instrumentals. For me, I like lyrics, I like vocals, I like a voice in the song. So for me, Pulling Teeth was maybe the little down part of this album, but still bass solo, take one. It's become a classic now for obvious reasons. But Phantom Lord was another one they were singing about metal. What are the lyrics in Phantom Lord? Can't remember, but it's another kind of metal rallying song. Excellent album. This is fantastic. So I had this, all the ones that I had on, they were on vinyl. At the time, you didn't say vinyl, you just said you had the record. And but I have it obviously on CD now, which is all broken and cracked. Jason Satterfield, my friend, would have a heart attack if he saw this. So Kill 'Em All is a groundbreaking, not just a good one, not just a classic, groundbreaking. There was, Venom, I was into Venom then too. Venom was, kind of close. They weren't as fast, they weren't as thrashy as Metallica. The first Exciter album, I guess, was around at that time. Long Live the Loud. And Raven, All for One. I guess these were all around the same time. But Metallica, at the time and looking back, was... I think they were the first band in this genre to say the word thrash. Well, Anthrax had metal thrashing now. That was 6 months later or a year later, something like that. But in Whiplash, you're thrashing all around. So they summed up the spirit of their music in this album, and especially on Whiplash and Metal Militia. But I like this album a lot. I think as much as anything for sentimental reasons. It was a big introduction to a new style of music for me. I still can listen to it and still love it just as much as I did. But sentimentally, this has a huge place for me. So Kill 'Em All was the beginning, and a fantastic, good way to start. Next, in '84, Metallica, of course, put out Ride the Lightning. This was not that much different. There were some big differences. Maybe the most obvious one was they had dropped the metal. Lyrically, they weren't singing about thrashing and headbanging and heavy metal heavy metal lifestyle and things like that. Musically, it was not that much different. It sounded, I would say it sounded a little bit better. But this has become a classic. Any one of these Metallica albums, especially the first five, maybe you could say, anybody could say that's my favorite one. But Ride the Lightning, Fight Fire with Fire. I was never a huge fan of that song. It was fast and it was heavy, but it was maybe I didn't like I didn't like the vocals or the vocal line in that one. Ride the Lightning, For Whom the Bell Tolls. I never got tired of that song. I don't, they play that live all the time, and it's one of those songs that, but I never got tired of For Whom the Bell Tolls. Fade to Black. I remember Fade to Black was a little bit, my friends or people that you talk to at these thrash metal shows, or I went to a few punk shows, the people that like this kind of music, Fade to Black was one that people talked about. I think maybe not that they didn't like it, but it was maybe the first sign of Metallica, say it with me, selling out. Because it wasn't Metal Militia, it wasn't Whiplash or Phantom Lord or anything like that. It wasn't a ballad. I mean, it's a very dark song. It's about suicide, but it had acoustic guitar and it was a little bit mellow. A Sign of Things to Come, probably for sure, but Fade to Black, probably both of those, and they're back to back. For Whom the Bell Tolls and Fade to Black are two Metallica classics. I think they play those probably at every show or almost every show. I remember when I had this originally, when I had the record. The one that I had a misprint on it. It was called, it said, For Whom the Bells Toll instead of For Whom the Bell Tolls. And I don't know whatever happened to that. I gave away or sold all my records years and years and years ago, decades ago. Escape, that's a song that Metallica themselves, the band, they didn't like that song. They felt it was too much of an obvious attempt at being commercial. I like it. I always like that song. Escape was good. I think they've only ever played it once when they played this whole album 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, and of course they played Escape there. Creeping Death was another one. Three pure classics on here. For Whom the Bell Tolls, Fade to Black, and Creeping Death are just three incredible songs. I had the single of Creeping Death, which had Am I Evil and Blitzkrieg. It was a really cool, everybody probably knows it, the 12-inch single of it, which were really cool to buy at that time, especially when there was unreleased material on it, which Metallica had. They put those two songs, Blitzkrieg and Am I Evil, on the, I think it's on this version. Yeah, of Kill 'Em All, many years later. But yeah, Creeping Death. Now again, as I said earlier about Anesthesia, not a huge fan of instrumentals, and the Call of Cthulhu was on here. I think even less, I liked it less because it was the last song. So to me, it felt like they just kind of tagged it on at the end. But I know a lot of people really like that song, especially after Cliff Burton died. I think people liked it even more. But again, just a classic album. I mean, I'm going to say this again and again as I go on. These first 3 or 4 or 5, however long you want to go, are required listening for any metal fan, maybe even any music fan. And it's amazing how Metallica, looking through these now, and I've known this all these years, how much they really grew and progressed. And going back on it, you can see where they were headed when you listen to, especially I think, to Fade to Black. So Ride the Lightning, another one. What can you say? Just classic after classic. Next was everybody knows this, Master of Puppets. Possibly, it's very dusty. Possibly, some might say not just the best Metallica album. A lot of people would say the greatest metal album everywhere. Of all time. If you see Kerrang and Metal Hammer and Classic Rock and all these magazines, and if they do polls, if they talk about the best metal albums ever, I'm sure this would be, if you did a vote, this might be, depends on your definition of metal, maybe Appetite for Destruction or some Black Sabbath album, but I think a lot of people would say this. This was very different. I remember very distinctly first hearing this. I don't remember the time of year, but there was a radio show in Toronto, a university radio show, a station called CKLN. It was 88.1 on your FM dial. And there was a show on Tuesday night called Arg Rock, and it was hosted by a guy called Brian Taylor. And he ran I don't know if he owned it or if he just ran it, a record store called Record Peddler, which was great for imports and hard to find stuff, metal stuff, for stuff that you maybe couldn't find in other stores. And on his show, he played, one night he played Battery and Damage Incorporated. And again, I taped it. And I remember so well, because I listened to this so much at the time. This was well before the album came out. Maybe it was weeks. To me, it felt like months, but maybe it wasn't that long. But I remember because he played them back to back. He said, here's some new Metallica. And he played Battery and Damage Incorporated. And when they ended, he said something like, well, I guess that answers any question about whether Metallica is going to sell out on their new album. Again, going back what people were talking about, Fade to Black. People thought that maybe Metallica was moving in a different direction, getting away from heavy, fast, aggressive thrash metal and going somewhere different. And then with Battery and Damage Incorporated, the first and last songs, which was kind of a thing that Metallica did. It seemed like the first and last songs on a lot of albums were the fastest. On the last two, they've been for sure. On Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, Justice for All, yeah. So that was my introduction to Master of Puppets. And I remember taking that tape to my friend's house. My good friend, my best friend at the time. He didn't like Metallica. Like a lot of people, if anybody who liked Metallica at the time, if you remember, you were very isolated if you were a Metallica fan. I remember I had a friend in high school, he was called Bob Lotson. And he was kind of like a classic. He was my age, but musically, he liked older. He liked AC/DC and Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin. And I liked Iron Maiden and Kiss and Metallica, newer stuff. I remember this guy, Bob Lotson, saying Metallica sucked at this time. But this was kind of their first introduction to the, not really mainstream, because they were not played on the radio. But this is when maybe people took notice. So getting back to my friend, I took that tape that I'd recorded that I mentioned earlier from Arg Rock, CKLN 88.1 on your FM dial, Tuesday nights with Brian Taylor. I took it to his house the next day, and I was flipping. I couldn't believe how good Metallica was. And I took it to his house, and he didn't like them at the time. He liked, this friend of mine, Pete, he liked Dio and mostly the same stuff I did, but he also at the time hated thrash metal. And I remember playing it for him, and he liked it, and he became a huge Metallica fan like I had been already for years and still am, and we both still are. This is another one, just relentless. Battery, Master of Puppets, The Thing That Should Not Be, Welcome Home. And then on the second side was Disposable Heroes, Leper Messiah, Orion, Damage Incorporated. They kept a very similar pattern with these three. With I'll talk about that more with And Justice for All, the next one. For as good as Metallica was, they really had a formula, which doesn't always work for some bands. For some bands, they get really called out on it, and other bands, I guess Metallica, I didn't care, and I still don't care. But I'll talk about that next. Almost next. That Metallica really had a formula going with them, and I mean, this is one of those albums. There are a few albums like this where probably every song at some point was my favorite, except Orion. Going back to what I said earlier about Call of Cthulhu and Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth, the Cliff Burton bass solo and instrumentals. Orion. I think Orion has become. I'm sure it's become their most popular, the instrumental that everybody loves. I think a lot of people love Orion as much as Damage Incorporated or Blackened or any Metallica song. But again, I wasn't a huge fan. But as far as instrumentals go, it was very, very good. So this album is just probably my favorite album. This one or another one, which I'll talk about later. If the other one had come out first, maybe that would have been my favorite. But this one came out first. So again, just like I said with Kill 'Em All, that I have that sentimentality factor to it. This was probably at the time, this might have been the greatest album I've ever heard, and maybe is still one of the greatest albums ever. Master of Puppets, everything about it was just perfect. The sound was perfect, the lyrics. Their look, they weren't a look band, an image band like Motley Crue or Rat or Kiss, but still, they looked the part. They looked like a thrash metal band. And just, my God, Master of Puppets is just incredible. What else do I need to say? So that's it. After Master of Puppets, now Cliff Burton died in September. It was September 26th, 1986, or September 27th, 86. I remember it very well because I'd gone to see Ozzy that night. Ozzy was playing in Toronto in 86. I think Queensryche was opening. I'm not sure, but I saw Ozzy in 86 and found out, I think it was the next day, that Cliff Burton had died, or maybe Cliff died the same day as the Ozzy concert or something like that. Now, just something I'll talk about, taking a break from talking about the albums, about Cliff Burton. I don't mean this with any disrespect or any, negativity, but I remember when Cliff Burton died, and I can't say nobody cared, but Cliff Burton then, he didn't have the reputation as he has now. You know, when people die, they become larger than life. Jimi Hendrix or Kurt Cobain is probably a really good example. When you die, especially when you die young, people maybe look at it differently as the years go on, especially if the band gets bigger and bigger. So because when Cliff died, Metallica was kind of on the edge of breaking out. Nobody, again, I can't say that nobody cared, but Cliff was just one of the four guys. Now, obviously, as time went on, people worship Cliff, not that they shouldn't, but it's very different from the way, I think, for the people that liked Metallica at the time, all my friends who were Metallica fans, and it was very community spirit when you went to metal shows, especially like this kind of music. When you went to these shows, you would see the same people at shows and you would talk to them. Maybe you never even knew their name. You didn't know anything about them, but you talked to them. And nobody, and when it came to Metallica, nobody was talking about Cliff Burton back then. Everybody, kind of how it was in reverse, everybody raved about Kirk Hammett, which is kind of funny because in the last 20 years or so, people, seem to think Kirk Hammett is a joke. So just a little comment there that it's funny how the Cliff and Kirk, kind of people's perception of them changed. But anyway, so Cliff died. I had tickets to see Metallica. I had seen them in 85 with Cliff. Now I had tickets to see them. It was supposed to be August 8th or August 9th, 86. It was going to be at the Concert Hall with Keel, which was a 2,000 seat venue, a great, probably my favorite venue in Toronto, maybe my favorite venue anywhere. I think everybody who went there would probably feel the same way. So Metallica was supposed to headline the Concert Hall. That was where they had played in 85, in the middle, opening for Wasp, and Armored Saint was opening the bill. And so now they were headlining this same Concert Hall, 2,000 seat venue, a year and a half later, and it was a big deal. And as I said, Keel was supposed to open. It was supposed to be August 8th or 9th. James Hetfield broke his wrist. I don't know why I'm showing you wrist, like as if I'm demonstrating something, like you won't know what I'm talking about if I don't show what wrist is. He broke his wrist skateboarding, so the concert was canceled, and I think it was rescheduled for I'm not sure when. And then Cliff died the following month in September 26th or 27th. I should know that. And then they came back in 86, and I saw them again in 86. One of the best concerts I've ever been to when Metallica played Maple Leaf Gardens. They went from being booked in the concert hall to playing Maple Leaf Gardens, which it was only a small configuration, but it was still probably 5 or 6 or 8,000 people. Incredible. That was one of my favorite concerts ever. And I bought the bootleg. There was a video bootleg. Some guy, back then, nobody really recorded shows. It was very hard. I'm getting off topic here. And a guy recorded that show. I bought that show at the aforementioned Record Peddler from Brian Taylor. I had it on VHS. I found it at my mother's house when I was there visiting. I was back home visiting in Canada at Christmas and found it, the old VHS tape. It's on YouTube if you find it. Metallica Master of Puppets Tour, Toronto, December 9th, 1986. Just incredible. So I talked about this with Anthrax, about these gap that bands used to do, these EPs, and they were kind of like a gap between the two albums. Just a quick way to keep, to keep their name on people's minds and to get something out there. So they had Jason Newsted, who played with them in the Toronto show that I mentioned. I guess one of his first shows, at least one of the first ones in North America. And then after they finished that tour, they released, and I don't have it here to show, but you can imagine that I'm showing the 598 EP, Garage Days Revisited. The name came from the recordings that I mentioned earlier that were on the Creeping Death single, the 12-inch single, were Am I Evil and Blitzkrieg, and they called that Garage Days Revisited. So this was Garage Days Revisited, or maybe it was just, I don't know. But anyway, that was a 5-song EP, kind of, I guess maybe just to say, hey, we're still around. We're going to have a new album out at some time. But for now, here's this 5-song EP, and we have a new bassist. So here's the introduction for most people. The Jason Newsted was the 598 EP, Garage Days. And best EP ever recorded, I think. And probably a lot of Metallica or music fans would say the same thing. It was only 5 songs there, and they were all covers. But oh man, I listened to that probably as much as Master of Puppets, or as much as it came out in '87, same year. That was one of my favorite years for music. Suicidal Tendencies, Join the Army, Anthrax, Among the Living, Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, The Cult, Electric, and Garage Days was I think, man, those were the top, and Sacrifice for Determination. '87 was great. Man, I listened to Garage Days obsessively. I just couldn't stop it. It was incredible. For me, it was like a new Metallica album. I knew that they were covers, but just incredible. Every song is perfect. It had great attitude. It was a great introduction to Jason Newsted. And as I said, I think most people will agree that this is an album that nobody can say anything bad about. Probably Metallica at that point, they had such a long stretch where nobody could say anything about them. So Garage Days Revisited was just unbelievable. And just 5 songs, short and to the point. And I did know a friend of mine called Jeff Winkler. He had a Diamond Head record that I never had, but he had. And he brought it over to my house one day. So I knew Diamond Head. I think it was after I knew Diamond Head did Am I Evil. God, I'm talking and talking. Diamond Head did Am I Evil, and I think I got into them after that, or I heard it from my friend Jeff Winkler after that. So when Helpless came out, I was aware of Diamond Head at that point. The other bands, I don't think I knew. It was Budgie. I think Budgie was a new band for me. Who else? Misfits. I don't know if I knew Misfits at that point. I never liked and still don't like Misfits. Who did Small Hours? I can't remember. But anyway, that Garage Days EP, the 590 EP, in the summer of '87 was just incredible. I had a Crash Course in Brain Surgery shirt that I ordered from a mail order in a magazine, and I bought another one a few years ago at El Chopo in Mexico City. So Garage Days Revisited. I don't know if they ever issued that on as a standalone CD. I had the record, the vinyl when it came out in '87, and they re-released it later, which I'm going to talk about when I get to that one. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Garage Days Revisited, whatever it was called, or Garage Inc. And so, but I'm going in a circle here. My God, I love that EP. Next, continuing the ascent, was And Justice for All. This was, for some reason, I had, I don't know if it was not an advanced copy, it wasn't an official one, but I had this on a cassette tape that somebody had dubbed before it came out. This and State of Euphoria by Anthrax, which were both 1988. My friend Paul Sadu, he worked at a record store, and I don't know how, he had like I said, it wasn't an official cassette, but he had a cassette tape, and he had Justice for All before it came out, and I listened to it. Loved it. It was, this is the one that I mentioned earlier. If this had come out before Master of Puppets, I would say this is my favorite, but Master of Puppets was first, so, you know, first in line gets the spot. But this is just as good as Master of Puppets. Now, obviously, the main thing people talk about now with this album is the lack of bass. This is the first full album with Jason Newsted, and it's been a big deal in the last, I don't know how long, about the lack of bass on this album. I can tell you, again, as somebody who was a fan at the time, nobody cared. I for sure didn't care. I don't remember ever having conversations with any of my friends or any of who were all Metallica fans or people that I went to concerts with or talked to at concerts. I don't remember anyone ever talking about that this album sucks because there's no bass, or it didn't suck for any reason. Everybody worshipped this album. I think the pro Cliff hadn't the shift towards people only saying that Metallica died with Cliff. I don't think it had started at this point, because this album was as good as I said, as Master of Puppets. For me, better than Ride the Lightning, better than Kill 'Em All. Now this, again, to what I said earlier, going back, this was the third album in a row that they clearly followed a formula. The first and the last song were the fast, thrashy songs. Maybe one little exception was Ride the Lightning, where Call of Cthulhu was the last song, and it could have been Trapped Under Ice was the fast song on the second half of the album. But they had the fast opener with the quiet intro. They had the acoustic intro on Battery and Fight Fire with Fire before that. This wasn't Blackened, wasn't an acoustic intro, but it had that rising volume of the guitar. And then next, same with Ride the Lightning and same with Master of Puppets, was the title track, which was kind of a long, epic song, especially with Justice for All, a lot of changes. Another unique thing, this is where things started to change with this album, was one. Now Metallica had said, keep in mind, this was when they were 23, 24 years old, and very underground. They said, we'll never do a video. They thought that was selling out. Now, I think looking back on it, you believed it, because you never thought they would make a video, because thrash metal bands at that point, videos, I guess, were expensive, and there was no point in thrash metal bands making videos because there was no outlet for them. Nobody's going to see them. They weren't playing it on MTV. In the States, we had Much Music in Canada. They would play it on the metal video shows. So Metallica did a video for one, and a lot of people were crying. That was maybe the first sellout cry when Metallica did one. They said, you said you'd never do videos, which, it's like saying that you would never go out with the pretty girl because you know that you're ugly and she's never going to look at you. But of course, if you had a chance, of course you would go out there. So they had a chance to make a video for one, and I was so disappointed. I thought that video sucked. I hated that it was, they cut it with the parts of the movie. It was Johnny Got His Gun, I guess, was that the book or I can't remember. Somebody knows what I'm talking about. And I didn't like that they mixed in the talking, the clips from the movie with the music. I probably didn't like that it was black and white. I thought, why did you do a video in black and white? But looking back on it now, or even looking back on it some years later, that was Metallica. Metallica was always ahead of the curve. They always did things, maybe not always, it didn't always work. I think it mostly worked, but they always did things differently. That was, for me, one of the first videos that I remember that had dialogue in the music, over the music. And I hated it at the time, but looking back on it now, that was a pretty cool move. And a really, really great video. I hope everybody changes their opinion about some things as you get older, or as time passes, or you start to see things differently. But one, I never got sick of that song. That video was on all the time. And, it's become another concert staple. One is just an incredible song. I could listen to it anytime, and I love it. The double bass is classic. Da-na-na-na, and it was also, speaking of formula, also the almost in the same position as For Whom the Bell Tolls. No, sorry, as I guess Welcome Home, Sanitarium for sure, and maybe kind of like Fade to Black. That started kind of mellow, but then got really heavy. And so again, that was the Metallica formula. Nobody ever called them out on it, nor should they, because it worked. And all I cared about at the time was that Metallica was just an unstoppable machine. I don't know if there was ever a period in my life where I liked a band that much for a period of whatever that was, 4 or 5 albums, or 5, 6 years. This came out in '88, so 5 years. Metallica was a machine. They were unstoppable, and they got bigger and bigger. This was the first tour where they played arenas. They played arenas on this tour, full-sized arena. I saw them on this tour with Queensryche. Queensryche opened for them in Toronto, Maple Leaf Gardens. But getting back to the album, my one single favorite, it's hard to pick one single favorite song from any artist who has more than, say, 3 albums. But maybe if I had to pick one single Metallica favorite song, maybe Harvester of Sorrow. That's the one I've gone back to many times. I had that single too, the 12-inch single that had Bread Fan. And man, Metallica's B-sides, their covers were as good as anything they were doing. So yeah, Harvester of Sorrow might be my favorite Metallica song ever. Blackened, that might be number 2. Blackened is just incredible. And I don't know if Shortest Straw would be number 3, but Shortest Straw is in my very, very short list of Metallica songs. So again, going back to as I've mentioned a couple times, where it lost just a little bit was the instrumental To Live Is To Die. I guess they put that on there. Cliff Burton had written that or co-wrote it, so they put that on there, I guess, as kind of a tribute to him. So that, I'm not a big instrumental fan, but it was a good one, a good one. I mean, Metallica, as I said at this point, they could do no wrong in my eyes, or I think in most people's eyes. So in Justice for All, I would say this and Master of Puppets are very equal. I would maybe give this slight edge to Master of Puppets just because it had a bigger impact. I'll use that when you're 16. Things are a much bigger deal. So Metallica, Justice for All, perfect. Now, this is where everything changed. This was the Black Album. This came out in 1991. I can remember very well, anticipating this. This seemed to take forever for this album to come out. The first time I ever heard it, or the first time I heard any music from this one was, there was they did a video for Enter Sandman. Obviously, it was the first single. Now, if I remember correctly, from what I remember, the video was the first time I ever heard this song. Maybe that was the thing at the time, to premiere the song and the video. People were getting the song and the video at the same time. Maybe at other periods you would hear the song on the radio first, and then sometime later there would be a video. From what I remember seeing the debut of Enter Sandman, which was the first time I heard it, and saw the video at the same time. I loved it just as much as I loved when I heard Damage Incorporated for the first time, or Battery, or Blackened, or anything. To me, Enter Sandman, I mean, obviously your opinion changes. I can't remember the last time I put on Enter Sandman by choice. It's not a song that I would ever choose to listen to. Same with maybe Crazy Train, Rock and Roll All Night. You know, We Are the Champions, We Will Rock You, you know, these radio staples. But man, when Enter Sandman came out, I loved that song. And Sad But True also, I remember hearing that. I remember thinking, man, that's so heavy. And it is, it's a heavy song. But I will say, this was the first Metallica album for me, and I do like this album a lot. I would say maybe even with the lack of instrumentals, for me, maybe this was the best Metallica album, because it was much more concise. They didn't have the long songs. They were much more direct, and maybe weren't as technical, which maybe some people didn't like that. But for me, this was the first Metallica album after 4 albums and 1 EP. This is the first one that had a couple of songs that I didn't really... I liked them, but I never loved them. Like I mentioned, like Master of Puppets or Justice for All, every song probably at some point was my favorite song, and probably even Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning too. This is the first one that there were a couple of songs, and they were Don't Tread on Me and Through the Never. I never fully embraced or got into those songs. I mean, I knew them, but so for me, that was maybe this was the first album I thought, okay, it's not, I don't love every song. This was also the first album where they had a true, I can't say ballad, because to me a ballad is a love song. This was when they had 2, what I guess we called at the time was the mellow songs, which first was Fade to Black on Ride the Lightning, and then Welcome Home, Sanitarium on Master of Puppets, and 1 on Justice for All. This had 2. This had Nothing Else Matters and The Unforgiven. Unforgiven was more in the vein of those ones that I just mentioned. It was a little... It had an acoustic intro, but it wasn't... it wasn't as soft, let's say, as Nothing Else Matters. Now, Nothing Else Matters, that's kind of like the opposite of, for me, of Enter Sandman. I did get very, very sick of Nothing Else Matters. It was on the radio constantly. The video was on constantly. And I just got really, really tired of it. Now, in the last couple of years, I actually really like it. Maybe I got sick of it to the point where I tuned it out. And now I've kind of rediscovered it. I had that same thing with, I think with War Pigs and maybe Run to the Hills, Iron Maiden, that I got sick of them, and then now I love them again. Nothing Else Matters is a fantastic Metallica song. And it really, that was really almost like you didn't know it at the time, but has become almost like a James Hetfield solo song. I think he played all the guitars, rhythm and acoustic. He played the solo. Yeah, Nothing Else Matters. A couple of other great songs on this. Holier Than Thou. This is the first album I think that came out that people started to say, I'm done with Metallica. Or if not that strong, maybe they started to really turn their backs on Metallica. A lot of people saw this as the sellout album because it was popular. I never did. This was the first one, as I said, that it didn't quite get my interest as the other ones. But to me, this was still a metal album for sure. It's stupid. I can't believe when I see people even now, saying this is a pop album. Pop is Michael Jackson and Duran Duran and Culture Club and Phil Collins and something like that. This is not pop. This is metal. This is not thrash metal. This is not Battery or Metal Militia. But man, there's no doubt about it that this is a metal album. But yeah, it was the first one where people started to turn their backs. But I liked it a lot. Wherever I May Roam, I think is a great song. And I think the reason why people thought I'm kind of all over the place here. I didn't go to the rehearsal, we had a production meeting and a rehearsal, and I skipped it. So that's why all my thoughts are disorganized. But this was the first Metallica album that didn't have a thrash metal song. The other ones had at least two. This had zero. Maybe Holier Than Thou was the closest. It was the fastest, but it still wasn't. It was up tempo for sure. It was the fastest, but not thrash. So I think that's why a lot of people. I love Of Wolf and Man, The Struggle Within. Those are two fantastic songs. The God That Failed, My Friend of Misery. Every song except, as I said, Don't Tread on Me and Through the Never, which are not even bad songs. They just were never favorites. So the Black Album, very, very polarizing. This was maybe Metallica at their peak live. Maybe Justice for All live. But they toured for, who knows how long for this, 2.5 or 3 years. I love the Black Album. I think if you don't like the Black Album, I'm sure there are some people who legitimately don't like it, but I'm also sure there are many people who poo-poo it because it wasn't thrash, who maybe couldn't get over the fact that it wasn't Metal Militia and they weren't singing about banging your head against the stage and kicking your ass and thrashing around like a maniac. There's no reason to not like this album. There's a reason that this has sold however many it's sold now, 15, 16 million records in the States. It's how many times platinum? I think metal fans, especially thrash metal fans, were kind of isolated. I think they liked being part of like a small group, and they felt maybe like when this became so popular that their like a family member was leaving. And a lot of people probably still don't forgive them. But again, the Black Album for me, I love it. If you don't like it, maybe you're maybe closed-minded, or maybe you just don't like being part of a bigger group. I'm like that too. I like everybody. Nobody's ever going to admit that. Now I'm really, really going off. But I could talk for a long time about this album. I've had conversations about this. But my final verdict on the Black Album, as I said, there's a reason why it's so popular. It's a perfect album. Perfect. It's fantastic. Now, continuing the polarization of Metallica. As I mentioned earlier, that people were very upset when they did a video for One, because Metallica had sworn that they would never do a video. People were furious when Load came out because Metallica looked like this. Because they cut their hair. They had short hair. I do admit that this look was very contrived. They had the cigars and not just the short hair. The cigars, and they were clearly, I mean, they weren't Warrant or Poison, but they were clearly going in a different direction image-wise. But I still see, I make the mistake too often about reading comments online on, everybody knows the websites, and I don't know why I do it, and I always regret doing it, but you would still see, you can't see an article or a story about Metallica without somebody saying they sold out, they cut their hair. Depending on your level of hatred for Metallica, they either sold out when they did the Black Album, or when they cut their hair, or when they did the video. Any of those were sellout points. Or maybe it was around this time, I think also, when the real Cliff Burton fans started to become very vocal and say things like, well, getting back to my earlier point, people now are still making comments about this, that they sold out, they cut their hair, and that also that this is not a metal album. This is metal too. It's not Judas Priest or Iron Maiden or Black Sabbath, and it's also not early Metallica, but this is it's a metal album. But this is when the Cliff Burton people started saying, imagine what Cliff would think of this, or Cliff would never have allowed this to happen, or if Cliff were still alive, Metallica wouldn't be writing crap like Load, they would be playing Metal Militia, things like that. Which, first of all, how do you know? I mean, if Hetfield had died, or any one of the other three had died, would people still say the same thing, that if Hetfield hadn't died? To be clear, James Hetfield is alive and hopefully well. He didn't die, just so if anybody scrobs forward to this point, James Hetfield is alive. So how do you know if James Hetfield hadn't died that Metallica wouldn't have been the same? And also kind of funny because it was, at this point, I think pretty well known that Cliff was maybe the least metal guy in the band. He was a big REM fan, and I don't know, Neil Young or U2, I don't know who he liked, but he was, and I think Metallica has even said that, Cliff, if anything, Cliff would have made them even go more away from how they ended up going up. But now, getting to my thoughts about this album came out in June 96. I want to say it was June 4th or June 6th or something. This came out right around the time that the Kiss reunion tour started. Sometimes you remember things by putting these events together. And the first single was Until It Sleeps, and I heard it on the radio, and I remember telling my friend about it. Obviously, this was I would say pre-internet. The internet was like an unknown thing then. And I remember telling my friend, who I mentioned earlier, I called him, I said, I heard that he missed it. I said, I heard the new Metallica. And I remember telling him it reminded me of Dokken. Now, I don't know what Dokken song I thought it sounded like. I don't even hear that at all now, but just the mellow beginning maybe sounded, I guess it did, not sounded like, but reminded me of a Dokken song. I didn't love the song when I first heard it, Until It Sleeps, but as time went on, I really like it a lot now. This album in general, now as I mentioned earlier with the Black Album was the first Metallica album that had songs that I didn't love. This is the first one for me that had songs that I didn't like, that I thought would have been better off if they had been left off the album. And they were the first part of the second side: Cure, Poor Twisted Me, and Thorn Within. I just don't like those songs. Those other two from the Black Album I mentioned, Through the Never and Don't Tread on Me, I like them. I just never fully got into them. These three, I think and this album was really long. It was 73 minutes or something. I think and I'll talk about that with another album later, I think those would have been better served being left off the album. For me, anyway. I'm sure there are some people who would say those are their favorite three songs, but for me, those were just throwaway songs. Now, to the good stuff, Ain't My Bitcha is, I love it. That's a great song. Very different from Metallica. Again, it wasn't thrashy, but I love Ain't My Bitch. It's great. And same with 2x4. House Jack built. The house that Jack built was okay. Not a favorite, but I liked it. Until It Sleeps, as I said, was pretty good. King Nothing was kind of like the house that Jack built. Seemed like another Enter Sandman, just not as good. Hero of the Day, I loved it. That was, again, one of their quiet songs, or one of the ones that started quiet and then got heavy. I love Hero of the Day as for me, one of the top songs in this album. I love it, Hero of the Day. Bleeding Me is a Metallica classic. That should be regarded, for me, that's as good as anything they've done. They were back here to writing long songs. They kind of abandoned the long, they got longer and longer from Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. Then they went back and kept their songs a little bit shorter on the Black Album. The songs got a little bit longer. Bleeding Me was 8 or 9 minutes. Let me see, 8:18. Fantastic Metallica song. Bleeding Me is just that riff in the middle is fantastic. I don't know why. I don't think they play it very much. They, I guess, played it on this tour, or maybe as part of the medley or something. That's one I wish they would bring back, at least occasionally. Do it occasionally. That's an excellent song. Wasting My Hate on the second half of it. That was a pretty good song. I like that. A little bit up tempo in the vein of maybe Holier Than Thou. Mama Said. That's maybe another Nothing Else Matters. A very personal song. Maybe my favorite song on this album. I'd say Bleeding Me or Mama Said or another one. Those are my three favorites. Thorn Within, as I said, Nothing. Ronnie, I really liked Ronnie a lot. Very different. It had that weird riff, that intro riff, almost bluesy. I don't know. That was a very different Metallica song. Very, very different than anything even on the Black Album. But I love that song. The Outlaw Torn, that was another really long one. That was 9:52, almost 10 minutes. Yeah, for me, Outlaw Torn and Bleeding Me, the long ones are, they're like Master of Puppets or Black, and I love those songs, and Mama Said. So I can understand this one being much more polarizing than the Black Album. This was much farther away from the classic, the first four Metallica albums than the Black Album was. But for me, I liked it a lot. But the first one, for me, where they weren't the Metallica that I liked. But still, I like this album, except for those three songs: Cure, Poor Twisted Me, and Thorn Within. Very good album, Load. Very maligned. Like I said, it really divided a lot of people. But I liked it. Load. Reload. I hate this album. This album sucks. I don't like it at all. This was, I guess, recorded during the time that Load. I guess these were all recorded in one session, and then maybe they went back and reworked a few of them. When this album came out, Fuel was the first one I heard. No, I remember, I think a friend told me, a guy I worked with called Helio, he told me that he heard the Memory Remains on the radio, and I hadn't heard it yet. And I said, oh, how was it? And he told me, and he said there's some weird chick singing at the end, who it turned out, I guess, obviously it was Marianne Faithfull. And so he told me about it, and before I heard it, so when I heard it, I didn't really like the Memory Remains, but then when I heard Fuel, which I think came out before the album came out, I loved Fuel. Great way to open an album. It hasn't really held up well for me, although I love it when they play it live. It's a really, really good live song, Fuel is, but it's not a song that I really listen to that much. This album for me is very much forgettable. Going through this track by track, at the time I didn't like it, and now I still don't like it. I haven't listened to the whole thing in many years, maybe 10 years, maybe more. I've listened to some songs here and there. You can maybe kind of see why maybe it was mentally, because, these were the songs that were left over. Maybe mentally you tell yourself that they were left over because they're not as good to fit on Load. I don't know. But going through this track by track, so Fuel, Memory Remains, Devil's Dance, I can't even remember a lot of these songs. Devil's Dance, I think, was the kind of slow with bass and drums info. Unforgiven 2, I thought was unnecessary. Better Than You had potential, I remember the intro was good. And then once the verses kicked in, I thought, I just didn't like it. Slither, I can't even remember how that song goes. Carpe Diem Baby, Come Seize and Suck the Day. I kind of remember that one. Never really got into it or don't really like it. Bad Seed, that was pretty good. I think Bad Seed was okay. Where the Wild Things Are, that's another, and I don't even remember. I mean, if you played it now, I'm sure I would know, but I can't even think of how that song goes. Prince Charming is another, and I can't think of how it goes. Low Man's Lyric is for sure my favorite song on this album. Very different. It was obviously a quiet and mellow song, and maybe that's saying something that I like the quiet, mellow Metallica songs far and away better than anything else. But Low Man's Lyric is good. I just listened to it a couple of hours ago, and I do like it. Low Man's Lyric is good. Very different from Metallica, too. They were continuing the experimental mode of Metallica. Attitude, Born Into Attitude, that's all I remember. I think this had, not the lyrics, but they just had a few, like a line or two from some of these. I don't know, it was the full lyrics for Low Man's Lyric. Some of them I just remember the chorus or a line from the chorus or something. Yeah, Better Than You, Better Than You, Better Than You. Maybe that was why I never got into it. Maybe because it didn't have lyrics. Although I think Load was the same. So yeah, this album, I don't like this album. Maybe I should listen to it again, which is kind of good. That's something I've done with all these bands I'm talking about. It's given me a chance to go back and listen to some of them, their other stuff, and sometimes it sounds better, sometimes it doesn't. I'll maybe go back and listen to Reload to give another chance, but for me, it's not a good album. And I guess really the only, two songs remain staples, which is actually more than Load. Fuel and Memory Remains, they still play those in most shows. Is there anything off Load that they play? No, there's really nothing like in the last 10 years or so. I mean, they mix it up a little bit, but there are at least two standards, more or less, from Reload. Nothing from Load. But yeah, so Reload, big thumbs down for me. I'll give another chance, and I was going to say I'll get back to you, but I won't get back to you. Now this next one, I got to take a break. I got to check something, but I'll be right back. I just needed to check to make sure I had the chronology right, to make sure I was getting them in the right order. Next was Garage Inc. I love this album. This is maybe just for the fact that it's double, I could say this is my favorite Metallica album. I like this for many reasons. For one, this was after one very disappointing album, Reload, and to a much lesser extent, Load, and even the Black Album. So when this came out, this was they did a couple of songs on here that this is obviously all covers. Everybody knows that, but the first disc was all new covers, newly recorded. The second one was a compilation of older ones they had done. And now some of the I like that Metallica was kind of getting back to maybe to their roots again. That they were covering Black Sabbath and Merciful Fate. And, they did punk, the first and last songs. So I like that Metallica was getting back. They sounded angry again and heavy and just for me, it was very, I liked having Metallica back, which continued, which I'm going to talk about later. So yeah, about the first one, the first album, the first disc in this collection, I've talked before about that I do love cover albums and I love cover songs, not necessarily on albums, like on a regular new studio album when a band does a cover. I don't always like that. It kind of stands out. I love albums that are all covers or B-sides or something like that. This, all of the tracks on disc one, the new ones were fantastic. Free Speech for the Dumb, Free Speech for the Dumb. It's electric. Sabracadabra. I was a big and still am a big Black Sabbath fan. Now Turn the Page. I couldn't have cared less about Bob Seger. when I was a kid or a teenager, Bob Seger was for old people. I hated probably even Bob Seger. So turn the page, but man, they just, the thing that Metallica does maybe better than anybody is covers. And I said that earlier when I talked about Anthrax and Goldfinger too. And Metallica, Anthrax, Goldfinger were the kings of covers. Pearl Jam live. But Metallica took covers and they made them Metallica. They never really covered them straight up. They always put a Metallica touch to it. Turn the Page maybe is my favorite on this. And I don't care about the Bob Seger version. I don't care about Bob Seger. Die Die My Darling, they went back to Misfits. Loverman was a very surprising... I think at the time I didn't know... I think I knew who Nick Cave was. I'd never really heard his music, but Loverman was a great choice. And what Metallica did to it, especially James Hetfield on this album, was just unbelievable. Loverman, I could say every song is my favorite. Merciful Fate was a medley of... how many? 4 Merciful Fate songs? I was never a huge Merciful Fate fan. I should have been, because that was the kind of music I was listening to in 83, 84, that heavy thrash. Well, Merciful Fate wasn't thrash, but they were that style of music. But I never liked Merciful Fate. But again, the medley that Metallica put together for this was outstanding. Astronomy was Blue Oyster Cult. File those under Couldn't Care Less, same as Bob Seger, but Astronomy is... I love this album, man. Whiskey in the Jar, Tuesday's Gone, The More I See, every song. This is, you look at cover albums a little bit differently than you do studio albums, because there's not too much creative about these. They didn't write the songs, but just in pure listening that I could put on and listen from beginning to end, I'd put this up with Justice for All and Master of Puppets. It's unbelievable. Now the second disc, I already mentioned this was called from 4 different. The first 5 were the Garage Days revisited that I talked about earlier. Helpless, Small Hours, The Wait, Crash Course in Brain Surgery, and Last Caress, Green Hell. And then Am I Evil and Blitzkrieg. These were all old. And then they had a collection of covers they had done. Bread Fan, which could be my favorite cover, my favorite Metallica cover. Helpless, I don't know, I like them all. The Prince, these were B-sides. Bread Fan was a B-side of Harvester Sorrow. Prince was a B-side of, I can't remember. Stone Cold Crazy was on the Elektra Records 40th anniversary Rubaiyat album, which was a bunch of current Elektra bands doing covers of old Elektra bands, and Metallica did Queen. So What? That could be another one that could be a favorite. That was the B-side of Sad But True. Also fantastic. Killing Time, I was never a big fan of that one. And then they included, this was great for me, the Motorhead cover songs. Motorhead is also one of my very top bands. Not up there with Metallica for sure, but I have a big Motorhead tattoo, so I'm a big Motorhead fan. So for me, when they had done this show in, I don't know when it was, 95, to celebrate Lemmy's 50th birthday, and Metallica played a live show at the Whiskey, and they recorded the sound check, and so they did Motorhead songs, Overkill, Damage Case, Stone Dead Forever, Too Late, Too Late. So for me, as being a big Motorhead fan, I got into Motorhead just a little bit before Metallica, so I kind of have them on the same plane. So for those two worlds to meet was that was like Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, to put it into perspective that way. That was a colossal battle of the Titans. But then I was a little bit disappointed. I think only for the fact that they were recorded during sound check, so they weren't as good maybe as, not that they maybe put too much effort into the Garage Days album, but the choice of songs was great. I think especially Too Late, Too Late. I wish they had gone into the studio and recorded them instead of a sound check, but I can't complain about that. Motorhead and Metallica together, can't complain about that. So as a double disc, this is as good as maybe Lost Dogs by Pearl Jam. As a 2-disc collection, this and maybe Lost Dogs by Pearl Jam are my favorite 2-disc collections ever. And what's kind of interesting about Metallica this is somewhat related to the next album I'm going to talk about. There were two things that Metallica never did. They never had, and still have never had, a compilation album, like a greatest hits album. And they never had a standalone live album. Now they've had, obviously in the last 10 years or so, they put out all their shows. All their live shows, you can download them. And, you know, they had the box set, the Binge and Purge. But they've never done they never did even back then. They had a few tracks. They never did a standalone single album or double album live album. And then they did this one. This was, and even this S&M, this is a little bit different because this was not a typical Metallica show. Obviously, this is something different. The S&M, of course, is Symphony and Metallica. And so this was their first official live album, although it was with the Symphony. And I never got into this. And I was maybe kind of disappointed after how much I loved Garage Inc., which I said was such a huge welcome back for me. This, I mean, you can't say too much because it was a live album, but I never got into this. I should have, because I love the concept of it. I thought, Metallica music, I thought would really lend itself to symphony music. And I think, I want to say I listened to this once only and never listened to it again. This is another one maybe I should give another chance, but I think not a bad idea. It was actually a good idea. As I said, Metallica music is good for that. And now they have the S&M 2 coming out in August. They did the show in San Francisco in like September last year or October, and I know that album was coming out in August. But I'll have to give this one another look. Call of Cthulhu, Master of Puppets, of Wolf and Man, Thing That Should Not Be. Yeah, they did Devil's Dance. Yeah, so this one I never really got into much, didn't really care too much. This is kind of at a time when Metallica, for me, was going up and down. I never gave up on Metallica. I didn't like them as much as I had in the past, but I never gave up on Metallica like a lot of people did. So S&M, not too much I can say. The next one, I don't have it, so you can imagine that I'm showing it to you here. It's basically an orange album with a fist holding a dildo or something as the photoshopped versions of it, and it was called Saint Anger. This was destined, Saint Anger was destined to be a failure. It was destined for everybody to hate it. This was at a time when the internet was starting to really catch on, or the time leading up to it. And Metallica was hated, mostly because of Napster. Everybody knows about what happened with Napster. They did a song called I Disappear that was on the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack. And that song got leaked, and it was on Napster, and you could download it on Napster. And Metallica was very unhappy with that. And they essentially ended Napster. They got Napster shut down. They were mad that, not that people were downloading it for free, they were angry, and I see their point, and I would take their side with it. I would take their side of it. They didn't like that their music was being put out before they could have a chance to put it out. I don't think they were ever really angry about people downloading it for free. So they got Napster, the short version is they got Napster shut down. There was not a more hated band, I think, than Metallica at that point. Think of how Nickelback is, or Limp Bizkit or something like that. I think people hated Metallica more than those bands ever. Now this is a year before Saint Anger came out. And also I guess some people were still angry about Load and Reload. And so I think in a lot of people, Metallica had really lost the luster. And then the word came out. This was before the album came out. It got out that there were going to be no guitar solos on the album. I don't know if that was a rumor at the time, or if they had confirmed it. It turned out to be true. There were no guitar solos on Saint Anger. So people hated this album before it came out for the no guitar solos, and people just hated Metallica in general. Now, I remember when the song Saint Anger came out, they did a video for it, and I remember hearing the song and seeing the video for the first time at the same time together. Similar to, I think, Enter Sandman. They didn't release the song to radio first. Maybe I need a drink. They didn't release the song. I remember the video and the song at the same time. I loved it, man. I thought Saint Anger was incredible. That was the first time that Metallica had sounded angry and even thrashy since like Justice for All, which was 15 years earlier. Again, it was a little bit of that with the cover album, but still not quite. So when I first heard Saint Anger, and they had to look back again. For whatever looks are worth, they looked angry. The song was called Saint Anger. Hetfield was yelling. It just sounded pissed off, and the music sounded very abrasive and aggressive and thrashy. Now the drums, as if people didn't hate it before it came out because of Napster and no guitar solos. That drum sound was, I've never seen or heard so much discussion about a drum sound ever. Although I remember when Justice for All came out, I didn't talk about this, but going back, people talk about the lack of bass on Justice for All now, and they didn't then. I remember people talking about the drums on and Justice for All. That was the first thing I noticed on And Justice for All was how peculiar the drums sounded. Always sounded great. And I'll get back to that in a minute. So the drum sound in Saint Anger really, really drove people crazy. People were amazing how angry people got about how much they hated Metallica. The drum sound. So the big complaints were the snare drum sound especially, and the lack of guitar solos. Now I'll talk about Lars Ulrich. I love Lars Ulrich. I think his drumming, for me, Metallica, one of the best things about almost any Metallica album, I think especially starting with And Justice for All, but even maybe before that, I loved hearing the drums on Metallica albums. Yes, maybe I don't know if he overplays or underplays live, and maybe he's kind of sloppy. He maybe plays fast. But Lars Ulrich, as a drummer on their studio albums, I don't like having like my favorite ever and my favorite of all time. Man, I love Lars Ulrich's drumming. But the sound, on Saint Anger, the drum sound, the snare drum was not so good. It's a very weird album for me. I really like a lot of things about it. I like that there were no quiet songs. There was no Mama Said or Nothing Else Matters or Low Man's Lyric, which I like all those songs. But they were back to just being aggressive and heavy again. Maybe a little bit misguided. I didn't really care that they were missing the guitar solos. I couldn't have cared less about that. But what I did care about missing the guitar solos is the guitar solos. They maybe could have used them to break up the songs a little bit more, to bridge them a little bit more. Because the songs, they were long and they seemed unstructured. It seems that they didn't, almost as if they were demos and they just didn't take the time to flesh them out into full songs, which is maybe what they did. But I would say 3 songs on the album: Saint Anger, the title track, Frantic, Tick Tock, Tick Tock, and especially Some Kind of Monster. Those are great Metallica songs. Another thing people didn't like about that album was that was the first album that Hetfield didn't write the lyrics. He wrote all the lyrics before, and this is the first time that everybody contributed, so everybody thought the lyrics suck. I guess because it wasn't just James Hetfield. Oh, and of course, I forgot to mention, Jason Newsted was gone. So I think this album was destined it was begging for people to hate it. They could have released, no matter how good that album was, people would have hated it. People just were looking for something to hate, which is maybe a good thing that it wasn't the best album, because people can kind of forget about it now. But I would take it for sure over Reload. It's my second least favorite album, but still not that bad. Some Kind of Monster, especially, I think it has great lyrics. A lot of people didn't like the lyrics I remember people made fun of my lifestyle determines my death style on the lyrics in Frantic. I never had a problem with that. If they had those lyrics on Ride the Lightning, everybody would have thought it was great. But everybody was looking for a reason to hate Metallica at that point. And also, at this point, as I said, the internet was, people had a voice and a platform, which is the worst thing maybe that's happened to music in the last 20 years. And so that album was destined to be a failure. But I kind of like it. Sweet Amber, I think, is an okay song. Invisible Kid was good. What else was on there? All Within My Hands. It had a lot of good aspects to it. They just, for me, didn't put them all together, which I'm sure is what they wanted to do. I can't tell Metallica what to do. I'm sure they did exactly what they wanted to do. So yeah, a very polarizing album for sure was Saint Anger. Now I'll put it away and get the next one. Death Magnetic, a long time between Saint Anger and Death Magnetic. I'm going to say this is one of my favorite Metallica studio albums. I can't say enough how much I love this album, and I'll talk about that more later. But this was still, I think, a little bit, people were still smarting over Saint Anger, and a lot of people were really destined to hate this album. People were very closed-minded. Metal fans are very unforgiving, I think, in a lot of cases. I saw a guy, again, it's such a mistake reading people's comments online. I saw the other day was the anniversary of a Mastodon album. I can't remember which one, but I read a comment from some guy who said, that album ruined Mastodon for me. And then they were good again, and now their most recent album ruined it. I thought, how can one album ruin a band? Like if you think Saint Anger sucks, how does that take away from how much you love Master of Puppets? But so a lot of people were still holding holding a grudge against Metallica because of Saint Anger for sure, and Napster and everything. So Metallica started teasing this album. They had these, I think they called them fly on the wall snippets. They're putting out like 30 or 60-second clips of them in the studio, all quick put together, maybe in the year before this album came out. And I thought it sounded really, really good. They sounded like really good riffs and sounded really good. And I was really looking forward to it. And then the first song they released from this album, the full song, was The Day That Never Comes. And I was so disappointed. I thought, man, like all the teaser clips that they did, it sounded so heavy and so full of riffs and aggressive. And then they put out The Day That Never Comes, which was in the vein as One and Welcome Home, Sanitarium, and maybe Fade to Black. And I didn't dislike it, but I thought, man, are they kind of going to be like that again? I did like it, but I was disappointed based on the clips. Then when the album came out, oh man, as I said, this is, if this had come out after, this would have been a great follow-up to And Justice for All. That Was Just Your Life, The End of the Line, and Broken, Beat and Scarred. Those are three, if you could section off any three Metallica songs, consecutive Metallica songs from any album, these might be my top three. These are like with Battery, Master of Puppets, and The Thing That Should Not Be. Or what else could be like that? I don't know if there's anything on any of their albums. Three consecutively. Those first three songs are just, those are pure classic Metallica Metallica songs. And then The Day That Never Comes, which I do like it. Actually, I really like it now. It's a fantastic song. All Night Long. I remember the first time I heard that. It's got a very long intro, and with many different parts, I kept thinking, man, just start the song. And so finally the vocals come in, luck runs out. It's a good song. Thrashy again, a little bit pretty heavy and fast, especially compared to what Metallica was doing in the few albums before that. Unforgiven 3. Again, a little bit unnecessary. It was okay, not my favorite, but maybe if they had called it a different song and just changed it a little bit so it didn't have any attachment to Unforgiven, maybe I would have liked it more. Maybe mentally I was turned off just by seeing the word Unforgiven for the third time. Judas Kiss is another good one. I wish for me personally, I'm not going to tell Metallica what to do. Maybe the first 30 seconds of that song could have been better cut off. For me, the song starts with the part before that is a little bit unnecessary. Suicide and Redemption, as I've mentioned, I'm not a big fan of instrumentals, especially ones that are 8 or 9 minutes. But I would say my favorite Metallica instrumental. I think I like it better than Orion, which I'm sure is blasphemy for a lot of people. 10 minutes and 2 seconds. That might be the longest Metallica song in the whole catalog. And then My Apocalypse. I remember very well hearing My Apocalypse for the first time. I literally smiled. I was listening to it. I was by myself and I listened to it. And as it started to play, I found myself that I was smiling. That was the first time that Metallica sounded like thrash Metallica. Now, That Was Just Your Life was fast and thrashy too, but not like My Apocalypse. So My Apocalypse, that was like, man, oh man, this is Metallica's back. This one also was under the microscope because Rick Rubin produced it. And so when you get a big producer like that, you're maybe setting yourself up. You know, people maybe have a lot higher expectations. I guess I didn't really care about that. I just know that I love this album. That was Just Your Life is, again, the first 3 songs. Now, again, I think they went back to the formula, which they repeated kind of on the next album too. The first and last songs were the fast, thrashy songs. They had the long instrumental towards the end. They had the kind of quiet one Fade to Black Sanitarium type song. Cyanide, I forgot about that one. That was a good one too. Very good kind of anthem-y. That was one of the riffs that they used when they were teasing it in the Fly in the Wall clips. But Death Magnetic for me was like the full welcome back Metallica into my life. They were, for me, they were back on par as they were with Master of Puppets and Justice for All. And I still love this album. I still listen to it pretty regularly, at least some of the songs. One little complaint, their album covers really sucked around this time. From, I'd say the last great album cover was And Justice for All. This album cover sucks. And Load, at least it was creative. Reload sucked. The Black Album, well, that was maybe a little bit different, but and the next one sucks too. But this album is a pure Metallica classic. Again, going back to Impact, if this had come out at the time, I think people would love this album just like they do Master of Puppets or Injustice for All. The problem with this live is that there's not any song on, well, maybe Cyanide. I was going to say there's no real song on here that's become like a Metallica staple live. Maybe Cyanide and occasionally The Day That Never Comes. I haven't heard That Was Just Your Life, The End of the Line, and Broken, Beat, and Scarred. I haven't heard those live. My Apocalypse, I would love to hear those live. But Death Magnetic, oof, welcome back into my life, Metallica. Thank you. Death Magnetic, this was kind of similar to Reload. These were songs that were recorded in the... What did I say this is called? This is Beyond Magnetic. Did I say Beyond or Death? This is Beyond Magnetic. These songs, these were 4 songs that were recorded during the Death Magnetic sessions and left off. Thankfully, as I just said, how much I love Death Magnetic. None of these songs, they're okay, but my favorite song on this is not as good as my least favorite song on Death Magnetic. So I think this is a great example of less being more, and I can talk about that with the next album. You know, you could call it listener's fatigue. When an album gets too long, or not just gets too long, it's hard to make a long album and have every song great. So if they had put these 4 songs on Death Magnetic as a full album, for me the lesser amount that I like these would have brought Death Magnetic down as a whole. So I think this was a great idea to put these out. These were better on their own. And so instead of having a mediocre album, you have a great album and a pretty good EP. I didn't completely get into this, but there are a lot of great riffs on here. I think they went kind of maybe in some strange directions. But yeah, this is okay. No real problem with it. I'm not sure why I bought it. I don't really listen to it actually ever. I don't know if I ever listened to it. I think by this point I was just downloading music or ripping CDs to digital. I'm not sure, but yeah. So a good example of a good EP that saved an album from being weaker. Which brings me to this. No. It brings me to this, which is this. Yes, I have 5 copies of Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Now, I'll continue with what I was just talking about. Hardwired to Self-Destruct was a little bit similar to Load in the fact that it had a couple of songs for me that just were not that good. And I listened to this album today. It was the first time I've listened to it. The full album is the first time I've listened to it in quite a long time. This album came out at the end of in late 2016. And I had a couple of songs, about half of it that they play regularly. I listened to those songs, I like them, but I had kind of forgotten about them. So I listened to this today, and on the second half, this is very, very, very similar to Load. I would say Man Unkind, Here Comes Revenge, especially Am I Savage, and especially Murder One. Not very good songs. I think it would have been better for me. Again, there are probably people, I said this about Load, there are people who probably think those 4 songs are the best songs on the album. Not me. Those, I think, and also this album was a double. I think it would have been better off. It's just too much. I think it would have been easier to absorb if it had been, how many songs is it? 12. If it had been 8, if they had taken those 4 songs and maybe held off on them, released them later as an EP or as random B-sides or, free downloads or something. But yeah, so those 4 are not that great. Now, other than that, I do like this album. It does remind me of Load, the way I think of it. In sound and the overall tone and the songs, it reminds me of Death Magnetic. Hardwired is another, again, they went with the formula of first song and the last song are the fast, thrashy songs, which they did on Master of Puppets, Justice for All, and Death Magnetic, and again here. Atlas Rise is great. Again, keeping the formula. They didn't, this one, the title track wasn't the second song, it was long. But Atlas Rise is a great, great Metallica song. Metallica still has the ability, even if I don't love this album, at least there are some songs that I would say, I can't wait for them to play live because I love that song. And Atlas Rise is one of them. Now That We're Dead, I loved it at first. When I listened to it today, I found that I didn't like it as much. It's pretty good, a little bit mid-tempo anthem-y. Moth into Flame is a really good one. Dream No More, which is Sad But True, Part 2. It's very slow and heavy. Maybe also a little bit of The Memory Remains, just that kind of greasy feel to it. That's a very, very heavy song, Dream No More. I like that one a lot. Cthulhu Awaken, excellent song. Halo on Fire is another. I think that they play live all the time since they've been touring for this album, and that one's okay. Confusion is pretty good, and then the 4 that are just not good. Murder One, man, I was so disappointed. I knew right away when they released the track listing. I thought that Murder One, I thought it's got to be a tribute to Lemmy. Lemmy had died at some point when they were recording this, and Murder One was the name of Lemmy's amp. And not that I was expecting it to sound like Motorhead, but maybe one of the worst songs, or my least favorite songs. Not on this album, but in the Metallica catalog. Murder One is just not very good. It just seemed too, I don't know, too heavy-handed. Just like, oh, we have to write a song about Lemmy. And I remember what song is that? I think it's Am I Savage and Man Unkind. Total Iron Maiden intros. Those songs sound like they could easily be on a later day Iron Maiden album. Spit Out the Bone. Now that's I don't know why Metallica fans really picked up on Spit Out the Bone. It's great. I love that song. But I thought, why is it? And there was like a campaign for them to play it live. And I thought, did everybody miss My Apocalypse, which was the last song from Death Magnetic before this? I think much better. I like Spit Out the Bone, but people are like, yes, Metallica is back. It's fast and it's thrash and it's heavy and it's aggressive. And I thought, wow, they did that on My Apocalypse, and for me, much better. But Spit Out the Bone is a good song. I like it. So for me, 1, 2, at least 3 great Metallica classics. And then I would say Moth into Flame, Dream No More, and Confusion. Ones that are really good. Halo on Fire and Now That We're Dead, kind of in the middle, and then 4 that I didn't really like too much. What I did like about this music aside from the music, sorry, about this album aside from the music, I was talking about this earlier this week with my friend Kevin Montavon, that I really get tired of bands giving studio updates, and we're you know, you see these on the metal websites that so-and-so band, they're ready to go into the studio, or they're getting ready, or they're writing, or they're preparing, and then they go into the studio and they post these updates. Here we are tracking the drums, and here we are setting up the guitars, and here's a picture of us with the producer, and then the album is out years later. This album just came out kind of out of nowhere. They announced it. I mean, everybody knew they were in the studio, but they weren't really talking about it. They weren't really doing updates. And then I think it was in August 2016, they said, hey, we have a new album. It's called Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Here's the artwork, here's the track listing, and here's the first single, which was Hardwired. And I love that. That made me, for me, the less hype maybe made me enjoy it more. When I first heard Hardwired, I thought, man, this is classic, heavy, thrashy, Metallica, short. This is, I guess, their shortest song at that point and still now in many, many years. It's only 3.5 minutes or something. So I loved it. And then the album came out only like a month later, you know, instead of 6 months later. And so I really liked that they put this out really with little hype. I wish more bands would do that. Enough with the hype. I don't need to hear every step you take in the studio. Iron Maiden is good for that too. They go in, they do it, and they say, here you go, and it's finished. So Hardwired to Self-Destruct, the most recent Metallica album, although now we're coming up on 4 years that came out. They're overdue. And I saw that earlier this week or last week, they said that they're working during this quarantine period. I thought, yeah, well, I can't wait to hear those songs in 8 years. So, whoo! That's it for Metallica. That was a long one. I don't know how long this has been, but it's a long time. I gotta stretch my back. It's hard to stand in one place for however long this was. So that's Metallica. That might be all of them. I don't know if you'll see me again doing this. Depends if I feel like doing more. I think those 8 that I've done, it's Motorhead, Kiss, Slayer, Iron Maiden, Pearl Jam, Faith No More, Metallica, Anthrax. Did I miss somebody? I don't know. Those are my super top bands that I can and have talked about for forever. And the bands that have been most important to me. My friend again, Kevin Montavon, who I mentioned earlier, he asked me the other day if I was going to do Pantera. And there are a few other ones that I'm kind of on the fence about doing. They were bands that came along later in my life, or maybe I'm not 100% familiar with their whole discography like I am with Metallica and Pearl Jam and Slayer. But I don't know if I'm going to do more. That was the last of the big ones. As I said, Metallica is my #1 band, so maybe it's fitting that that's my last one. But if you watch the whole thing, I know nobody did, but thank you. And I love Metallica, my favorite band in the world, let's say it. That's it. See ya.